The Khyber Pass breathes like a sleeping creature, slow, patient, and older than memory itself. Wind moves through its corridors as if tracing forgotten paths, carrying with it the dry scent of dust, metal, and rain that never comes. For centuries, this narrow wound between mountains has been both bridge and grave. Armies crossed here when the world still believed in empires. Persians, Greeks, Mongols, British, each leaving behind something small enough to be lost and heavy enough to be remembered. Coins, broken arrowheads, bones bleached to the same shade as the stones. The earth holds them quietly, refusing to give them back. The cliffs rise on either side like weathered sentinels, carved not by men, but by time and wind. Their shadows stretch and fold with the sun, making the valley seem alive, breathing in light, exhaling silence. In that silence, it is easy to believe that the pass listens. The air hums with a low, steady rhythm. The winds pulse against the rock, the earth's slow heartbeat. They thought they were alone. They always did. Yet each soldier, whoever crossed here, felt something watching. Even now, the roads built over ancient caravan trails seem to shimmer under the weight of footsteps long gone. Travelers speak softly without knowing why. The rocks appear to lean closer when the wind changes. Locals say the land remembers everything that moves through it, but it tells its stories only in echoes. Soft murmurs that blend with the wind, words half-shaped, half-dreamed. Some places do not sleep. They only pretend to. The Khyber is one of them. It waits beneath the surface of history, neither dead nor alive, holding its breath between centuries. As night approaches, the temperature drops and the shadows thicken. Somewhere between the cliffs and the wind, the watchers listen, patient, unseen, eternal. The Khyber has always been more than a path. It is a fortress built by the earth itself, a gate carved through stone and centuries. Every ridge feels deliberate, as though placed there to test the courage of those who dare to cross. For traders, it was a promise of fortune. For armies, a throat through which destiny had to pass. Caravans once wound through its narrow turns, camels carrying silk, rifles, salt, and rumours. At night, fires flickered along the slopes like scattered stars, and voices in a dozen tongues traded not just goods, but warnings. Locals say the pass keeps its own guards. Men once swore they saw silhouettes that moved when they shouldn't, figures standing too still against the cliff edges. They were never close enough to be seen clearly. The Watchers, the villagers called them. Not ghosts, not men, not angels, just witnesses. Pause. Witnesses to every secret whispered across this threshold of war. The old say they do not age, that they are as much part of the land as the rock and the wind that shapes it. Stories drift between borders like dust, and with each telling, the details change. A shepherd claims he once left bread at the mouth of the pass, only to find it untouched but warm the next morning. A driver on a supply route reports headlights flashing back at him from inside the mountain, though no road leads there. Such accounts are dismissed, logged as folklore, then quietly remembered when nights grow long and radios fall silent. Not all guards were men, that much is certain. The rest no one can prove. The Khyber keeps its silence, and in that silence, imagination fills the void. The pass endures, half real, half legend, a living record of those who crossed, and those who only watched them go. In the winter of 2002, the joint patrols moved along the Khyber's spine with quiet precision. Reports were filed, coordinates marked, and nothing was left to chance. The rhythm of the work was its own kind of lullaby, steps over gravel, the faint clink of rifles shifting against harnesses, the low hum of radios whispering into the dark. On paper, it was routine. US and Pakistani border units ensuring safe passage through the corridor, recording every sound, every light, every moment of stillness. In reality, it felt like walking through an old memory that refused to fade. The nights were dry and cold. The sky stretched open, dusted with stars that looked close enough to touch. Soldiers rarely spoke except through short bursts of static. Checkpoint echo. This is Patrol 37, moving north by Grid 27. The same sentences, night after night, as if the language of war had condensed into code and repetition. Beyond the reach of floodlights, the land swallowed their voices whole. Each man carried the uneasy awareness that out here, silence could mean peace, or something else listening. Among them was Corporal Hayes, a man who had served long enough to grow patient with emptiness. He was the kind who could sit for hours beside a radio, head tilted, as if listening for something more than orders. The younger soldiers teased him for his habit of turning the volume down during static bursts. "You hear ghosts, Hayes," one joked. He didn't smile. He said static had rhythm, and rhythm meant life. Sometimes, he claimed, the static pulsed in patterns too deliberate to be random. No one argued. They had learned that the Khyber didn't need imagination. It provided its own. Every rustle of wind against the wire, every shifting stone on the slope above them, sounded like a whisper caught between languages. The logs recorded nothing unusual. Coordinates, timestamps, weather clear. Yet as the night deepened and the radio hissed like a slow breath, Hayes leaned closer to the speaker. Somewhere beneath the noise, something faint moved with purpose, listening back. Then, without warning, the line cut to silence. It began with a routine cross-check. Maps, old and new, laid side by side beneath the weak glow of a tent lantern. The intelligence software flagged a discrepancy, the kind that usually meant a data error or an outdated satellite sweep. A small village once labelled Sarai appeared on the older charts, but was gone from the digital overlays. No coordinates, no structures, nothing but empty terrain labelled uninhabited zone. Yet in the nightly patrol logs, the name kept reappearing. Checkpoint Sarai, marked once, then gone. At first, no one questioned it. Soldiers had grown used to inconsistencies. The maps often lagged behind reality, but the pattern held. Every week, a patrol would note passing through a hamlet that, according to command's own data, didn't exist. They described it as small, quiet, the kind of place that should smell of wood smoke and livestock. Except there were no sounds of life, no light, no movement, just the faint outlines of walls, like ruins pretending to still be lived in. When asked, local drivers avoided the subject. A translator later explained that the villagers refused to speak the name at night. They called it the Lightless Valley, a place that, once entered, was forgotten by maps and men alike. Only those who walked through it remembered, and even that memory, they said, faded within days. "We weren't supposed to be seeing anything," one soldier muttered during debrief, the words half lost to the crackle of the recording. His report was logged, time-stamped, filed, and quietly ignored. Weeks later, a new satellite pass scanned the area again. The valley registered no structures, no heat signatures, nothing to mark habitation. Yet patrol GPS data still plotted movement directly through the coordinates where Sarai should have stood. Command issued a correction, updating the charts. Empty terrain confirmed. But the logs kept writing themselves differently, as if the land refused to comply. Marked once, then gone. The name lingered like static between transmissions, a whisper of a place that both existed and didn't, waiting on the edge of memory for someone patient enough to look again. The night began like any other. Clean air, thin as paper, the kind that makes sound travel too far. Patrol 37 moved along the ridgeline in a slow, measured pace, every step crunching faintly over frost. The valley below was invisible except for the grey shimmer of heat signatures flickering on the tablet's infrared display. It was a quiet shift, the kind of stillness that makes men start counting their own breaths. Then, at 22:46 hours, a pulse appeared, a single reflection, a sharp, deliberate flick of light against the slope 200 meters ahead. The corporal leaned closer to the screen, frowning at the pattern. Reflections were common. Metallic debris, discarded casings, even shards of glass could throw a false echo. But this one didn't scatter or fade. It hovered, then it blinked. Infrared translated it as heat, a pale shimmer breathing like metal warmed from within. Hayes zoomed in, adjusting gain. The image stayed perfectly symmetrical, a twin-point glow, too steady, too deliberate. He checked the timestamp, noted the coordinates, then radioed command. Possible reflection. Request verification. Static answered first, then a calm voice. Negative anomaly. Sensor distortion. Proceed with route. He watched the display for another moment, silent. The light dimmed, then returned, twice like a code. Blink. Pause. Blink. The same rhythm as human eyes adjusting to the dark. Hayes said nothing to the others. The patrol moved forward, their headlamps off, trusting infrared to guide them. At 22:52, another reflection appeared, this time at their flank. Identical symmetry. It tracked their movement without motion blur, as if something observed from within the terrain itself. Hayes spoke quietly into the mic. "Command, we've got a secondary." Again, the response was procedural. Confirmed environmental refraction. Continue as planned, but he kept watching. On the screen, the 2 points aligned, then rose, subtly, to a height that suggested standing level. A silhouette began to take shape. Shoulders, faint curve of a head, then nothing. The glow faded as though someone had simply closed their eyes. He marked the coordinates anyway, writing in small letters beside the entry. Pattern resembles observation behavior. The line beneath it stayed blank. In the cold wind, the radio hissed once, then fell back to its slow, breathing static. They stopped moving when the instruments began to disagree. Thermal scans showed shapes ahead, 5, maybe 6, clustered at the mouth of a shallow ravine. The readings were steady, warm, unmistakably alive. Yet the valley was silent. No footsteps, no breathing through calms, not even the faint rustle of fabric. Hayes raised a hand, signaling halt. The squad froze, their outlines merging with the rock. The display glowed faintly in his palm. Silhouettes crouched low, perfectly still. The corporal toggled between infrared and visual. Nothing visible, yet the heat signatures held. He whispered to the translator, "Locals?" The man shook his head. There were no settlements this far up. A soldier exhaled, barely audible. In the thin air, the sound carried too far. Then something shifted. Not the figures, but the rhythm of the silence around them. It grew heavier, thick enough to feel against the skin. The night had texture now, like fabric stretched over hidden movement. "Are they watching us?" Someone murmured, not expecting an answer. Hayes didn't reply. He simply adjusted his scope, the faint whir of the lens sounding unnaturally loud. Through it, the shapes seemed closer, though no one had moved. The temperature dropped suddenly. Breath turned white, then vanished entirely as the air stilled. Hayes could hear his own pulse through the earpiece, steady and slow. The figures remained motionless, too precise, too human to be tricks of heat. He thought of the infrared glow from the night before, the twin points like eyes. It felt now as if those same unseen watchers had multiplied. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the heat signatures began to fade. Not all at once, but in sequence, one after another, like lamps quietly turned off. Hayes blinked hard, waiting for the display to reset. When it cleared, the screen was empty. The wind returned, soft and indifferent. They advanced cautiously, rifles lowered. The ground was smooth except for a few shallow depressions pressed into the dirt, oval and even, spaced at knee distance. He crouched to touch one, still faintly warm. The soil smelled of metal and rain. He didn't speak. The others waited for instruction, but he only stared at the marks. They weren't footprints. They were impressions of someone kneeling to observe, like someone studying from inches away. The recordings arrived 2 days late, carried in a sealed pouch marked Routine Audio Sweep, Khyber North Sector. Inside were 4 hours of radio logs, ordinary transmissions layered with the soft hiss of field static. The analyst, a man named Farid, listened in a small concrete room lit by a single red bulb. He had reviewed hundreds of these tapes before. Most were uneventful, just night chatter between patrols, the hum of machines trying to fill the silence. He started playback, hands steady, mind half drifting into the rhythm of repetition. At exactly 3:14 a.m., something unusual emerged. Beneath the static, a low murmur pulsed just behind the voices. It wasn't feedback. The frequency sat slightly below the radio band, as if layered underneath. Farid leaned in, adjusting the dial with careful precision. The murmur wasn't random. It followed the soldier's speech, repeating each sentence a few seconds later. The delay was perfect, but the tone was wrong. It was softer, slower, and somehow deliberate. He rewound and listened again, headphones pressed tight. Checkpoint clear. Proceeding by grid 27, a pause. Then, faintly, checkpoint clear. Proceeding by grid 28. The difference was subtle, a single correction. He frowned and noted the anomaly. Echo latency impossible. Recording not looped. He ran a waveform analysis, expecting the mimicry to be machine interference. But the data showed something stranger. The reflected voice was not identical. It carried inflection, tiny human hesitations that no electronic echo could generate. It wasn't a playback. It was participation. Farid sat motionless, the low hum of the air conditioner barely masking the faint whisper from his headphones. He slowed the speed. Beneath the soldier's routine phrases, he caught breaths, real, measured breathing, perfectly synchronized, yet belonging to no one on record. He increased gain. The murmurs grew clearer. Sometimes the echo anticipated the original line, completing it before the soldier finished speaking. He turned off the speakers. For a moment, the room felt too quiet. The red light flickered once like a heartbeat. He wrote a final note across the log sheet. The tape wasn't repeating, it was responding. Then, in the margin, smaller letters. Listening has become mutual. He only wanted to understand. That was what his colleagues said later, when the reports stopped coming. In the beginning, Farid's work was meticulous. Precise timestamps, consistent handwriting, everything in order. But after the recordings from Khyber arrived, his notes began to shift. Sentences bled into fragments, and technical terms were replaced by metaphors. Reciprocal observation, he wrote in the margin of a report. When you look into the signal long enough, it looks back. He lived alone in a narrow apartment above a closed tailor shop in Peshawar. The walls were bare except for a pinned map of the border, marked by loops of red thread. At night, the glow of his monitor illuminated rows of handwritten journals spread like a mosaic across his desk. He played the tapes repeatedly, filtering and isolating frequencies until the voices began to overlap in his head. His colleagues complained that he was working past dawn, sometimes forgetting to eat. He only wanted to understand, they repeated, half in pity, half in fear of catching whatever he was chasing. The new entries in his log no longer read like analysis. They read like confession. They do not speak in sound, but in timing. Each silence answers something I haven't yet said. Observation is the purest form of contact. He began to address the unseen presence directly, whispering into the recorder as though into a patient ear. The tapes that survived are filled with his voice alternating between clinical calm and quiet awe. If I remain silent, he says in one, they adjust the noise to fill the space. They hear the shape of the thought. There's a pause, breathing, measured and slow. Then, they hear us thinking. By the end of the month, his handwriting had grown smaller, as if retreating from the page. His final document was unsigned. A single sheet found on the desk beside a still spinning reel. It contained no analysis, only one line written in careful ink. Understanding requires surrender. After that, nothing. The office light burned for 2 days before someone shut it off. The reports ended there, and the room returned to silence, as though the listener had finally joined whatever had been listening all along. The first mention appeared not in a classified file, but in a faded diary bound in cracked leather, dated 1891, signed by a British survey officer stationed near Landi Kotal. His handwriting, neat but hurried, described silent watchers upon the ridge, figures unmoved by wind or distance, observed through glass, yet leaving no mark upon the sand. The language was matter-of-fact, without drama, as though he were recording weather. In later entries, the tone shifted. Fewer measurements, more reflection. They seemed to record, he wrote. Not soldiers, not natives, not spirits. Recorders of war, taking no side, but present all the same. A century later, the same region yielded nearly identical testimony in declassified Soviet reports from the 1980s. Night vision teams captured silhouettes that appeared beside their own units, matching formation before fading at dawn. No physical trace, no tracks. One Russian officer, writing home, used a phrase almost identical to the British diarists. They stand, they watch, they remember. The distance between their words was nearly 100 years. The resemblance was perfect. In the archives, these fragments appear scattered across time. Ottoman patrol logs, tribal folklore, even Mughal-era poetry. Always the same details. Stillness mistaken for men, absence of shadow, mirrored breath. Every empire met the same witnesses, the narrator observes quietly, and each one thought the discovery was its own. Patterns form when enough centuries are allowed to speak. It becomes clear that the watchers belong to no flag, no faith, no line on a map. They appear whenever men carry weapons through the Khyber, as if the act of war itself summons observation. Not judgment, just record. The same language repeats, carved into reports and verses alike. They watch, they do not interfere. The handwriting changes, the alphabets shift, but the tone, calm, uncertain, reverent, remains constant. And so history folds inward, revealing its symmetry. The watchers outlast every uniform and anthem, appearing when violence nears completion, then vanishing as if to close the chapter. Perhaps they are the one unbroken continuity between conqueror and conquered. Perhaps they are the memory the land keeps for itself. Among the villages that border the pass, the stories have softened with time. The elders no longer speak of fear, but of a kind of order, an unspoken treaty between the living and the unseen. They say the watchers are not spirits of vengeance, nor omens of death, but custodians of balance. When men go too far into the madness of war, something steps forward from the quiet to remind them they are being seen. Those who vanish, they say, are not lost but taken to remember. Not punished, not erased, preserved, like memory carved into stone. Around the fire, the old men tell it gently, as though recalling neighbors who left long ago. They are here to keep the world from burning, one explains, tapping the ash from his pipe. War forgets itself. They help it remember. The younger ones laugh, uncomfortable but respectful. Yet even they lower their voices when the wind rises, as if the air itself listens. The narrator's tone remains calm, not to question, not to prove, but to record. The tale carries a moral that feels older than the language it's told in. Maybe they do not haunt us. Maybe they help us remember. The watchers, in this version, are archivists, keepers of consequence, witnesses ensuring that history never fully dissolves into legend. The soldiers who disappeared across empires, the coordinates that changed on maps, the echoes caught on tape, all belong to the same accounting. Observation as remembrance, silence as mercy. At the edge of the pass, where the rocks glow faintly under starlight, it's easy to imagine them still there, motionless, patient, waiting for the next noise of men. Not to interfere, but to witness, to measure the distance between cause and ruin. The land, after all, has no reason to forget. It simply watches until we learn to see ourselves the same way, without anger, without fear, only awareness. And in that awareness, peace begins to look less like victory and more like the act of being seen. At dawn, the relief unit reached the outpost. The sun hung low behind the ridges, washing the valley in colourless light. From a distance, the place looked intact. Sandbags in neat rows, antenna still upright, a thermos left beside the lookout chair, but no one answered the radio call. The perimeter showed no breach, no tracks leading in or out. The wind had swept the ground clean, as if the night itself had erased what it borrowed. Inside, everything was still warm. Mugs half filled, blankets folded. The logs were up to date until 03:17 hours. Routine entries, calm handwriting, no distress. Then the pages stopped mid-sentence. The only sound came from the comms set, where a low static pulse looped endlessly, too regular to be noise. When the technician increased the gain, faint traces of human sound emerged. A clipped word here, a fragment of laughter there. The cadence matched the missing men. They tried to trace the source, but the signal had no origin point. It was feeding on itself, transmitting, receiving, then echoing back in softer fragments. A whisper that didn't end. Hayes's call sign appeared once on the display, blinking without transmission, before vanishing again. They played the recording over and over, searching for pattern or code. Each time, the whisper reshaped slightly, like language dissolving into breath. By noon, command had ordered the site sealed, equipment packed, tapes catalogued, and a new team installed. The report filed afterward contained no speculation, no mention of warmth, of whispers, of names spoken by no one, just coordinates, temperature, visibility, data flattened into fact. That night, one of the replacements swore the static on Channel 9 formed a rhythm, faint but deliberate. When asked what it sounded like, he hesitated, then said it was close to breathing. No one recorded it. The line remained open until morning. Morning came softly, spilling over the jagged ridges like water over stone. The Khyber breathed again, its valleys slowly filling with the pale gold of first light. No voices broke the stillness. No engines hummed, no boots disturbed the dust. Only the wind moved, carrying with it a memory of breath, the faint rhythm of things that once were. From above, the land looked unmarked, ancient as ever, patient as always. It had seen too much to grieve. The narrator's tone remains calm, unhurried. In the end, every watcher, human or not, fulfills the same duty: to witness, to stand at the edge of the known and observe without judgment. The soldiers who vanished had done their part, their presence folded into the long continuity of this place. The watchers, whoever they were, had done theirs. The past kept its promise of silence. It had always been that way, recording, remembering, waiting for the next dawn. Perhaps that is all history really is, the act of being seen, each generation crossing the same threshold, leaving behind traces for something older to notice. The living watch the past watches the living, and between them the light moves, indifferent and eternal. To witness is to exist. To remember is to remain. The sun rises higher, drawing lines of fire across the ridges. The rocks gleam briefly, as if returning a signal no one can read. Down in the valley, the wind carries the sound of static, a soft, endless murmur blending into the breath of the earth. For a moment, the difference between man and myth disappears. There is only the watcher and the watched, sharing the same horizon, the same light. And then, as the voice fades, there is only the quiet, infinite act of seeing.